Good afternoon. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Terror returns to France, this time in the south. At least 84 people are killed after a lorry ploughs through packed crowds celebrating Bastille Day in Nice on the Côte d'Azur. President Hollande arrives in Nice, having led the condemnation among world leaders. France's nationwide state of emergency, in place since the terror attacks in Paris, will be extended by 3 months. Back in Britain, with her new cabinet in place, Theresa May begins to focus on the challenges ahead. At the end of a tumultuous week in British politics, we assess the start of the May era. And the former governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, joins us to talk about the economy, Brexit and cricket. All that coming up in the next hour. With us for the duration, Sam Coates of The Times and McElvoy of The Economist. Welcome to you both. Now, last night, as thousands gathered to celebrate Bastille Day, a national holiday, in the southern French city of Nice, a horrifying terror attack took place. A man driving a lorry killed at least 84 people, including 10 children, another 100 injured, as he ploughed through crowds on the Promenade des Anglais, pedestrianised for the evening, swerving, zigzagging in an attempt to maximise the death toll. The lorry was finally stopped after over a mile of carnage when police shot the driver dead. President Hollande has said the attack was, quote, an undeniable terrorist in nature. Speaking in the last hour, Prime Minister Theresa May said that the UK stands shoulder to shoulder with France.
I'm shocked and saddened by the horrifying attack in Nice last night. Our hearts go out to the French people and to all those who've lost loved ones or been injured. While the full picture is still emerging, it seems that at least 80 people are feared dead and many others have been injured. These were innocent victims enjoying a national celebration with their friends and families. We are working urgently to establish whether any British nationals were caught up in the attack. Our ambassador is travelling to Nice today with consular staff, and they will be doing all they can to help anyone affected. I've asked my Deputy National Security Advisor to chair a COBRA meeting of senior officials to review what we know and what we can do to help. And I will speak to President Hollande today and make clear that the United Kingdom stands shoulder to shoulder with France today, as we have done so often in the past. If, as we fear, this was a terrorist attack, then we must redouble our efforts to defeat these brutal murderers who want to destroy our way of life. We must work with France and our partners around the world to stand up for our values and for our freedom.
The Prime Minister speaking earlier this morning. The Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, also gave his reaction this morning.
Obviously, our thoughts are very much with the people of France and Nice, and an absolutely appalling incident. I think there'll be ministerial meetings later on today to discuss the implications for this country, if any, though I don't at this time know of any read across or implications for the UK. Clearly, this represents a continuing threat. If this is a terrorist incident, as it appears to be, this represents a continuing threat to us in the whole of Europe, and we must meet it together.
We're joined now by the BBC security correspondent Frank Gardner. Frank, welcome back to the programme. Is it significant that no Islamist group has yet claimed responsibility?
No, not at all. They didn't claim responsibility for the Ataturk airport attack in Istanbul. There have been several attacks which have gone unclaimed, but there's no doubt in the investigators' mind and in the minds of analysts who study this stuff in think tanks and elsewhere that this is inspired by so-called Islamic State. There was a call to arms, as it were, back in September 2014 by the IS spokesman, somebody called Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, who called for exactly these kind of attacks. That was followed in December 2014 by a couple of much smaller and nothing like as devastating vehicle attacks in the French cities of Dijon and Nantes, but nothing on this scale. So I would be very surprised if this isn't linked in some way to IS. Even if this guy was operating on his own, he will have probably got inspired in some way. He had a petty criminal record, but no known terrorist links. That doesn't mean to say he wasn't consorting with people, but we're going to have to see what the investigators say. But this won't have come out of nowhere. This will be, I'm quite certain, in response to the military pressure that ISIS is under in Syria and Iraq. They're losing territory day by day. They're losing recruits. They're losing commanders. And this is their way of lashing out at soft targets.
What more, Frank, do we know about the perpetrator? Born in Tunisia, but lived in France, dual nationality. What else do we know about him so far?
I'm not even sure he had French nationality, actually, Andrew. There's some dispute about that. He's certainly Tunisian born, 31 years old. Unconfirmed reports have named him. In fact, I'm not going to give the name in case those reports are wrong, but he's certainly of North African heritage. He had a police record for theft, traffic offences, violence, but no known links to terrorism. He was not on the 3,000-strong terrorism watch list. I think this is yet another sign that the French domestic intelligence agency needs to get on top of the problem. You can put thousands of troops on the streets, you can raise the national terror threat level, you can extend the state of emergency, but if it's not stopping attacks like this from people who are known to the police, they need to do a better job.
Frank, given what he did, which was to drive a truck into a crowd, in a sense, I mean, he was armed, but the south of France, as we know, is awash with arms. Could he have done this on his own? Did he need a support group, or could you just have planned this? He rented the truck on Thursday, I think. Did he need a support group to do it?
No, he didn't. But I think, if you talk to people who study these things, they say, look, there is no such thing as a pure lone wolf attack. It's a bit of a cliche. It's like this awful cliche, all the hallmarks of a jihadist attack. It's unlikely to have been a complete sole operator. He will have, once they've got his digital footprint and they've looked at who he's been in contact with, either on his mobile phone, through encrypted apps, through whatever means, almost certainly it will transpire that he's been in touch with somebody. He will either have been viewing extremist propaganda material and been radicalized passively, as it were, by what he's seeing and viewing, or more likely he's been in touch with people who have encouraged him to do this. I think it's unlikely that he was sent by IS from Syria, but let's see. There's been a mixture. If you look back at the Bataclan attack in November and Brussels earlier this year, there's been a mix of people who've been trained in Syria and others who haven't actually necessarily left Europe to carry out these attacks. This was actually depressingly easy to do, but also shocking that for such a high-profile event with thousands of people, that French security, which was braced in the wake of these attacks and warnings, braced for something like this, that they weren't able to stop it.
Well, that brings me on to my next question. But before I ask it, I want to make clear the person to blame for what happened last night is the man who drove that truck and those who support him, but and not the police or the security services.
Absolutely.
But to ask you this, did they make a mistake which turned out to be fatal? I've been to these events in the south of France. The Promenade des Anglais, the road is closed for the night. They pedestrianise it while the fireworks are going on. You can walk up and down, which meant it was easy for him once he got onto the promenade. He didn't have to go up onto the pavement. He could just go mow them down, right down on the street. Should the police not have had barriers, have stopped anything from getting onto the promenade? First of all, I totally agree with you. I think there's often a tendency in these things to lash out at the people who are trying to stop this carnage, when actually you're absolutely right. We need to remember the person to blame is the perpetrator and the ideology behind it. That's assuming that, as this does appear to be, a politically or terrorism-motivated attack. But I think, coming on to your point, it's a failure of imagination, I would call it. And this is, I think, a generic failure of many intelligence agencies. I think it applies to MI5, our own security service, 10 years ago and beyond, where they didn't actually have the imagination to understand that some of the people who were seeking shelter in London and using London as a platform to attack countries in the Middle East,
that these people were actually quite dangerous. They've learned a lot since then, and that's one of the reasons why, so far, we haven't had a successful attack, because they've got a lot better at trying to predict these things and think outside the box. To me, this was a failure to plan effectively. This was a failure to think, what if? And what people need to do is what I would call red teaming it. Put your mind, Andrew, in the mind of a terrorist. If you want to attack something, think of an ingenious way to do it. Now, you can't foresee everything, but they should have been able to foresee this. What happens if somebody gets a big vehicle and gets through that? It's carnage. That's what happened. They should have predicted it.
Frank, I've got one final question for you. Charlie Hebdo, November in Paris, and now this one weeps for France, don't you?
You do. France is the #1 target of opportunity for jihadists. And, let's try to keep an open mind on this. Yes, this looks like a jihadist attack, but so did Anders Breivik and the extreme right-wing motives that he had for what he did in Oslo a few years ago. So we don't absolutely know, and no one has claimed responsibility for this yet, but it certainly looks like it. Either way, France is absolutely right up there at the top of the target list for Islamic State, because it's pushed back Al-Qaeda in Mali, it's taking part in airstrikes in Syria and Iraq, and it's got the burqa ban. It's been particularly right out there, forward-leaning in confronting Islamic extremism. So it's made itself very much a target. Britain's a target too, so is Belgium, so is Germany. But in France, there is the perfect storm of quite a few discontented individuals who are being drawn to jihadism. You've got the seething banlieue, where a lot of people feel, the suburbs, where a lot of people feel no stake in their country. You've got relatively open borders. You've got easy access to automatic weapons. The list goes on.
Frank, I know you have a busy day today. I'm grateful you took time to be on the Daily Politics. Frank Gunner there. We will weep even more when we see the size of the coffins.
Yes, I think that's certainly true, Andrew, isn't it? We think there are 10 children dead at least. And the fact that this was so clearly an attack, and Frank's excellent summary there, I think, brought that home. It was an attack on a family day. It was an attack targeted on people doing the most relaxed and enjoyable things.
It's a family night out, Bastille Day.
I don't mean to say that an attack on something else is any less tragic, but I think the very interesting point there about think the worst thing in your imagination that a terrorist, if so it is, could do. And this really would be very high on the list, precisely because, as you say, the size of the coffins, the range of the victims.
He knew there would be families. By the way, there were a huge Muslim population in Nice too. There would be plenty of Muslim families walking along the promenade. He knew the promenade. In normal times, you can't do it. It's bumper-to-bumper traffic. But he knew last night, because it was closed, he would be able to do what he wanted to do.
And the manner of the attack suggests that every single aspect of the planning of it was designed to heighten the impact. And that would include going after families and children. That included clearly picking an extremely high-profile day in the French calendar and a place where these celebrations are particularly prominent and well known. So there's no doubt about that. I mean, I think we're already entering an interesting debate. Frank Gardner was saying they should have predicted this. Those were his words. It seems very hard to see for security services in Britain, in France, to game absolutely every single incident like this. As we look back and look for someone to maybe apportion blame to, there are an awful lot of people. In France is the single biggest supplier of terrorists to Islamic State, according to some analysis. And there is clearly a problem across the country with disaffected people going to Islamic State to fight in that jihadist conflict there. And it's going to be incredibly hard for the French security services that are suffering, that have now suffered their third massive, terrible, tragic terrorist attack, to keep tabs on everything that confronts them.
We're just learning that the British police across the UK are now reviewing security around every major event over the next 7 days. Prime Minister Theresa May finished appointing her cabinet yesterday. Despite having been billed as the continuity candidate, Mrs May made some far-reaching changes, bringing new faces into the government, ousting many of David Cameron's closest allies, and even reorganising Whitehall departments. after the four great offices of state had been given to Boris Johnson, Philip Hammond, Michael Fallon and Amber Rudd, the Prime Minister announced two new positions for prominent Brexit campaigners. David Davis becoming the Minister in charge of exiting the EU, and Liam Fox taking on the role of Secretary of State for International Trade, which becomes more important now we're in charge of our own trade deals, or will be. The changes were more radical than many had anticipated. Mrs May has created a new department for business, energy and industrial strategy. That's being led by Greg Clark. It merges the business and the old energy and climate change department. And responsibility for higher education, which was with business, has now been given to the new Education Secretary in the Education Department, Justin Greening. Just four cabinet positions have stayed in the same hands. Michael Fallon at Defence, Jeremy Hunt at Health, Wealth Secretary Alan Cairns and Scottish Secretary David Mundell. Not a lot of choice for her there, since there's only one Scottish Tory MP. Theresa May removed many high-profile figures from the previous government, of course, sacking George Osborne, Michael Gove, Nicky Morgan at Education, Stephen Crabb at Work and Pensions. He hadn't been there long. She also cleared out David Cameron's advisers from Downing Street, replacing them with her trusted aides, Fiona Hill and Nick Timothy, who became Joint Chiefs of Staff. She has included 7 Leave campaigners in her cabinet, up from 4 under David Cameron. Theresa May had been expected to appoint more women to the cabinet. We were told to look out for the March of the Women, but in fact didn't quite become a march, more a trickle. She increased the number by just 1 to 8. And we're told, according to the Sutton Trust, that there are more people who went to state school in this cabinet than in any cabinet in Britain since Attlee formed a government, a Labour government, first major Labour government in 1945. So how will the new Secretaries of State be feeling today, and what will be at the top of the agenda in the first few days in the job? Our Giles has been talking to some of their predecessors.
Imagine yourself nervous, delighted to have been appointed, possibly itching to get on with the job you've always wanted, or daunted by one you didn't expect to get. Every Secretary of State is human, so what's it really like, day one in the job?
It is a voyage of discovery, and so, you know, you do some things at the start that you probably wouldn't do at the end, and you definitely do some things at the end that you definitely wouldn't do at the start.
I went into the Foreign Office on the first day with a speech fully prepared to give the staff within minutes, literally within, I think, 10 minutes or so of arriving.
A predecessor of mine described to me that there was a blue sky out of which dark clouds and thunder and lightning came. I don't even remember, metaphorically speaking, the blue skies, because the grey was there from day one.
Well, the priority for me was to prove to people I could do the job. When there was scepticism about that, and I said to officials, look, I want you to argue with me, but also, once I've made a decision, I want you to get on with it.
How day one in a department goes depends on how you got the job, a reshuffle or an election. In 2010, William Hague entered the Foreign Office having already met, in opposition, the Permanent Secretary to discuss what he might do on day one.
We ended up having a dinner inside the headquarters of the Secret Intelligence Service. Now, in what other country in the world does an opposition figure plan the next government with the officials inside the headquarters of the intelligence agency?
But being appointed after a general election isn't always a bonus.
When I turned up, I think I'd probably not got my head into that mode as much as I would have done had I been pretty certain I was going to hold my seat. And therefore, I think those first few days, looking back, were wasted days for me. It took me the weekend to actually think, well, I have got the job, now what do I want to do?
Ed Balls knew there was a chance Gordon Brown would give him a job, but as day one started, he clearly wasn't sure.
I was doing an interview at 7:30 in the morning, live on BBC Leeds, and as I was doing the interview, my mobile phone rang, And they could hear it down the line, the interviewers. And I looked and they said, "Who is it?" And I said, "It says GB Mobile." And they said live on the radio, "Answer it, answer it." I said, "I can't answer this live on the radio." And then it rang off. And the presenters from BBC Leeds said, "Oh my gosh, you've missed your chance." And there was a little bit of me which was slightly worried I might have done.
And it doesn't end there. Sadly, once you're in office, there's no guarantee you actually have an office.
For the first few days, indeed the first couple of weeks, I didn't really have an office. I was sort of sitting at a desk with some partitions to sort of kind of supposedly protect me. I then kind of graduated to a meeting room, and eventually an office was created. So, you know, it's like a sort of rickety startup.
And of course, for those who do have an office on day one, you never know what you're going to find in it.
They weren't expecting me, they were expecting someone else, and as part of the process of finding out what happened in the department, we came across a slideshow that says how to deal with Eric Pickles. It was when I was doing the job in opposition, and I have to say it probably was the least successful bit of lobbying the department had ever done.
From day 2 and onwards, you learn how to do the job better.
It turned out to be much more useful to set up a crisis centre that could cope with any crisis, the ones that you haven't predicted, than to try to predict what crisis was going to happen next. And I learnt that after, 10 months or so. I wish I'd known that on day 1.
As a flock of new ministers are taking up their roles, don't imagine their day 1 as a Secretary of State puts them in any less of a flap than day 1 in any job does to any of us.
Our Giles there, of course, he's done a series of mini docs on the great offices of Secretary of State. If any of the new incumbents are watching, I'm sure we could find a box set and send you. Might mean you can hit the ground running. Sam, it took Margaret Thatcher 4 or 5 years to get the cabinet she wanted. Are you surprised that Mrs May's done it in 24 hours?
Not hugely. She seems to have shown a certain amount of pre-planning in everything she's done in the early hours of her premiership. I mean, I find her style absolutely fascinating and very different from David Cameron. This reshuffle shows her incredible self-confidence. It was definitely ballsy. It was definitely possibly even foolhardy when we see how it plays out. What she has done is, whereas David Cameron would put people he was very close to in senior jobs, particularly George Osborne, people he was never going to disagree with in public or in private, what Theresa May has done is lined up a load of big beasts who all have completely different views on the biggest job that this government has to do. So you've got the challenge of Brexit coming down the track, which will be the single biggest thing this government has to do. And she's brought in David Davis to run the Brexit department, Boris Johnson to run the Foreign Office, Philip Hammond to run the Treasury. And you couldn't get more divergent views on what to do with Europe from Philip Hammond to David Davis. One believes in maybe threatening going back to a WTO tariff-style system, whereas Philip Hammond wants to stay as close to the single market as we can. And what that means is power is really only in one place in this government, and that is in Theresa May. For she is the person who is going to have to single-handedly synthesise and unite a divergent top team. Now, if she turns out to be an absolutely brilliant man and woman manager, that's great. If she isn't, God help Britain.
Well, Sam may not be surprised. I'm surprised by this. I'm surprised by the scale of it, and I'm surprised that it isn't just about men and women. It's about a quite substantial change in the structure of Whitehall is taking place in the departments as well, which can only mean she's been thinking about this for a long time.
Yes. I think, it struck me, Andrew, that you've been sitting there in these meetings, I'm sure this has never happened to you, where you've occasionally looked round, thinking, if I could just clear out everybody, what would I do? And really, she has had that workplace fantasy, and she's put it into practice. That isn't something that was done overnight, and particularly not what you might call the boring nitty-gritty bits, like that departmental reorganisation there involving peers, also education and higher education. So she clearly has had a view that certain things don't work very well in the government. She didn't think it was worth bothering to talk to David Cameron and George Osborne about that. She didn't think she'd get very far. She had a famously testy relationship with George Osborne. But she clearly had it all down on a piece of paper, which makes you think that she may have been the only person who was absolutely sure that she was going to become Prime Minister. It's a no-mercy reshuffle, isn't it? Because it's interesting that Sam emphasises there the balance, and I think that's, that is very true. She's got the balance of ideas about what to do about the EU. But it's a Brexit-heavy cabinet. And we've also seen, even people like Andrea Leadsom only a week ago, a competitor fell foul of Theresa May, fell foul of everybody with her daft remarks. But put slightly parked in a job that doesn't look at DEFRA and environment, doesn't look absolutely right for her. There's an element of revenge here.
And of course, you're right, she's put three, it does have a Brexit feel to it, because she's put the three Brexiteers, Boris Johnson, Liam Fox, David Davis, into the key posts for Brexit. Of course, given that they're not exactly best friends, it's not exactly the three amigos, but so we shall see what happens there. But the bigger challenge is not people, is it? So the bigger challenge is she made an almost Ed Miliband-esque speech before she walked into Downing Street earlier this week. That's fine, largely rhetoric. How you turn that into policy is that's a much bigger challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, she's been thinking about this for years. If you go back to a speech she gave to Conservative Home in June 2013, it was nigh on identical to the speech she gave on the steps of Number 10 and the article she wrote in the Times on Monday. That is the length of time that she has been planning this. But you're right. Actually, for me, the biggest challenge for Theresa May is none of the things you just mentioned. It's the fact she's got a majority of 12. Now, a majority of 12 at a time where her in-tray is more complicated and more fraught than at any time in my lifetime.
But she also has an opposition in chaos, which rather makes the majority of 12 bigger in practice.
Except that already she has, for instance, picked on one faction, the modernisers, and taken them out and had them all shot. So they'll be on the backbenches, possibly grumbling, possibly being unhelpful. You've got the people who supported Andrea Leadsom, the Leadbangers now. Andrea himself.
What are you calling them?
I believe they were called the Leadbangers.
Very well. I've not heard that.
But some of them called
it like a tribute band.
Some of them gave them their own name, and they could cause problems as well. So parliamentary votes are going to be tough at a time where we've got really difficult issues coming down the track.
All right, thank you for that. Speaking of Labour, while the attention this week has been squarely on the arrival of our new Prime Minister, Theresa May, in Downing Street, the turmoil inside the Labour Party has continued. One of the two Labour figures planning to challenge Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership, Owen Smith, was due to launch his campaign formally this morning, but he cancelled the event, obviously because of the attack in Nice. But he joins us now from Cardiff. Owen Smith, welcome. Let me begin with Nice. I know you want to say something, but as you do, if the terrorists are now moving beyond the capital city, Nice is a major regional city. It's a long way, though, from the capital. We have major cities a long way from the capital. Are you satisfied that we have the scale and speed of an armed response in this country if we face similar terrorist attacks?
Well, first of all, Andrew, can I just say on behalf of the Labour movement, if you like, and certainly on my behalf, how awful the attack in Nice was. I woke this morning to see the full detail of it, and it's horrifying for any of us who are family. If anybody has a family, if anybody has any sense of how dreadful these events must be for the people involved, it's just heartbreaking to see it happening again, and that's why I cancelled my launch today, and I won't be campaigning, as it were, today. Look, I worked in the Northern Ireland office as an advisor, and I saw how brilliant our security services are and our police forces in Britain at dealing with terrorism. We've unfortunately, of course, had a long history of having to deal with terrorism in Britain, and I think we are adept at doing it. We know that many attempts to visit terror on the streets of Britain have been foiled in recent years by our security services and by the army and the police, and I am eternally grateful to those people for standing guard over us. But we also know that the security services would tell us that when individuals such as the man who has done this in Nice are determined to take life and prepared to swap their own, then it's incredibly hard to prevent them, whether that's in London or anywhere else. We know that when people are determined, it's very difficult to stop them being able to take other people's lives if they can sacrifice their own. I hope that we will stand safe and secure forever, but we know that that's not something any of us can guarantee.
All right, thank you for that. Let's come on to your leadership bid. You've said the Labour Party needs new leadership, but surely the person who's shown leadership in this has been Angela Eagle. She's the one that challenged Mr Corbyn, and you're leading from behind.
Well, Angela triggered the contest, and I think many people in the Labour Party feel Angela is owed a debt of gratitude for doing that. I think now it's a case of those of us who also think we've got something to say, who also think we've got a challenge to make for the top job in the Labour Party, to come out and say so and be brave enough.
But you waited for others
you
waited for others to move before doing it yourself. Why did you do that? Kept your head down below the parapet, and then Angela Eagle puts her head above, and then you join in. Why?
Well, if you want the honest answer, Andrew, what happened is I resigned on the Monday. I went back to Wales on the Monday evening because my wife rang me to tell me that my brother had been taken seriously ill. I went to an A&E department with him on that Monday evening, and I was there for 29 hours. And I came out on the Wednesday to be met with a barrage of phone calls, hundreds of phone calls from members and colleagues in the Labour Party urging me to consider putting my hat into the ring. I thought hard about it. Over the following days, I met again with Jeremy on that Thursday and again on the Monday, both occasions asking him to consider what compromise he could reach in order to stop what I think will be a divisive leadership contest, because I think we desperately need to heal and unite the Labour Party. In the end, I felt that there was no compromise that could be reached, and therefore a challenge to Jeremy was the only thing that might bring about unity in the Labour Party, which is so vital, because we've got a Tory government. The Labour Party needs to be set to both oppose it and more importantly, be a radical and credible government in waiting.
All right, be a radical and credible alternative. On what policy areas do you disagree with Angela Eagle?
Well, Angela hasn't laid out a policy platform yet, has she? I've started laying out mine. I've said very clearly up front that I think Brexit is potentially going to be enormously damaging for the British economy, and we as a Labour Party need, I think, to say to the current government both that we need a seat at the table in debating this, but more importantly, we trusted the people to make a decision last time round. We now need to see exactly how this deal unfolds, and if it's not as good as people were hoping for, we should trust the people to make another decision.
Let me come on to Europe in a minute, though, because it wasn't what I asked you. Are you telling me that as far as you're aware, there are no policy differences between you and Angela Eagle?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying one instant policy difference is I've come out and said there should be a second referendum to give people a chance to
But she may well agree with that. She's a very strong pro-EU politician, isn't she?
She may do, but I'm not here to say that yet.
And other than Trident, what policy areas do you disagree with Mr Corbyn?
Well, let me go back to Angela for if I may, or Jeremy, because I put this to Jeremy just last week. I think inequality is a massive problem for our country right now, Andrew.
Well, so does Miss Eagle and Mr Corbyn are always saying that too.
So
Mrs. May says that. So where are the differences?
So I'm proposing that we should do something about that and change the constitution of the Labour Party, change Clause 4 in order to reflect our desire to reduce inequalities of power and wealth and opportunity. And
hold on, let me get this right. Your answer to inequality is to change the Labour Party's constitution. That's a policy difference, is it?
That's the first one. The second thing I think we should do, Andrew, is put our money where our mouth is on austerity. Anti-austerity is the right policy for the Labour Party, and Jeremy's been right to articulate that. But we need to go beyond slogans. We need to put our money where our mouth is, and I would propose that we institute a enormous building programme in Britain. I would propose that there is a British New Deal, if you like, a £200 billion investment programme for social and physical infrastructure in Britain. We've allowed our social and physical infrastructure to languish for far too long. We've allowed decay. There are potholes in the streets of Britain, but there are also problems with our schools, problems with the social care, lack of vocational education. Housing is a disaster. The only way we will address that is if we've got an active interventionist government. And perhaps where I differ with both Angela and Jeremy, is that I feel that both New Labour and Jeremy have in many ways been too timid.
Okay.
New Labour wasn't bold enough, despite many of the great things that it did.
Let's not go back
Jeremy's
to
not
New
gone
Labour
beyond
because we haven't got
slogans.
much time. Let's try to look forward a little bit here. Labour's already lost Scotland. You don't look like getting that back anytime soon. Explain to our viewers how a second referendum on the deal that will be done, how will that help you among Labour voters in the north, a lot of whom voted to leave?
They did. A lot of voted to leave in Wales, but I think lots of those voters, lots of the people I grew up with in my constituency, my hometown, now feel that they were sold a pup, now feel that they
What's
were
the evidence for
lied
that?
to. Well, the evidence is anecdotally talking to people on the streets across this country, and I think some polling evidence.
What's the polling evidence that shows that?
The evidence of the lie is very clearly, unless
what's the actual, as opposed to people you talk to, which is only anecdotal, what is the evidence that there's now a huge buyer's remorse?
I didn't say there was huge buyer's remorse, Andrew. I said I think there is out there a sense that some of the things that were promised, an extra £350 million a week for the NHS, an instant stop
It wasn't
to
promised for this
immigration. Week. Well, I think it was promised. That's
no,
what
it
they were
was
talking
not
about.
promised for this week. Because they don't even get the money till we leave. We're still paying.
Well, I remember
the
that
fee. I'm just asking,
Andrew,
because
I
you've
remember
said
that.
this many times, as if people have suddenly changed their mind. They think, oh, we voted the wrong way. It's a big claim. I think you need to give us the evidence to substantiate it.
Well, one, I haven't said it many times. I said it a couple of times. Secondly, my view is that we trusted the British people to make the decision. I think lots of people now feel that the terms of that decision, what they thought they were buying, more money for the NHS, controls on immigration, aren't going to be realised, certainly not going to be realised in the way, the simplistic terms that they were promised. And I think it is reasonable for a Labour government that does believe that we should be in Europe and at the heart of Europe to say to people, we trusted you to take the decision, now we trust you to look at what is negotiated over the next 2 years, 18 months, and determine whether that is exactly what you want. The analogy I'd use is you wouldn't go out and buy a car without having a look under the engine and checking that it actually worked. Well, that's what we've been asked to do with Brexit, and now we've got an opportunity to test drive the car, if you like, over the next 18-month period and check whether we actually want to buy it.
Well,
it's not,
I
think,
suspect many of
terribly
your own
difficult.
voters will think you're trying to redo the referendum and get a different result. And,
I'm trying
that will play into to UKIP, but we will see on that. But let me ask you this. If you want to see off Mr Corbyn, don't you and Miss Eagle have to make up your minds which one is going to do it? I mean, surely there should only be one anti-Corbyn candidate in this race. Who's it going to be?
Well, I agree with that. I think there's a widespread view in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and indeed amongst many of the members, that probably should only be one
so how will
challenger.
You get there?
I'm not sure yet. I think it's not really for me to determine how we get there as one of the challengers, but I am prepared to submit to whatever mechanism, whether it's the deputy leader of the party or the parliamentary leadership of the party or the NEC come up with, or the PLP itself. I think we need to find a mechanism to get to there, and I will absolutely stand by whatever that decision is.
All right. Owen Smith, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Today. Thank you. Right, back to Nice. Let's get the latest from Nice now. We're joined by our correspondent there, Andrew Plant. Andrew, good afternoon to you there. In Nice, the city must be in a terrible state at the moment, as must all of France. What's the latest that you can tell us?
There's obviously a lot going on here in Nice right now, Andrew. Every few minutes we're hearing the wail of a new police siren go past. We're not quite sure what they're up to, but we have heard a bit more information in the past half an hour. We know that from the truck, you might just be able to see the top of it actually. Police have screened off the road behind me where
we can see
those terrible
it,
events took place yesterday, but you can probably just see the top of that truck. That is the one that you've seen pictures of with the bullet holes in the window, the one that was driven down here causing such carnage late last night. We know that in the cab of that truck they found personal items. They've told us that they were bank cards, a wallet, if you like. We also know that they've now raided a house somewhere here in Nice. We don't know where and we don't know what they've recovered, but French media, local media, are naming a man. They say he is a 31-year-old local man, possibly of Tunisian heritage. His name is Mohamed Boulio, I believe it's pronounced. So that is the latest information from here. That is what's being said on French media, but we haven't had any formal confirmation from the police.
And what word now? We understand on the latest figures that there were 84 fatalities, including 10 children. but that there are still about 100 people in hospital, and some of them are in intensive care and on the critical list. Do we know more about that?
Yeah, and I mean, that's what people are having to come to terms with here today. I can't swing my camera around because of the amount of media that are behind us here, but if I could, I would be able to show you a lot of people just standing at the end of the road here next to a barrier. There are lots of barricades. You can't move freely here at the moment for obvious reasons. There is a shrine beginning to develop, lots of flowers being laid this morning, lots of people who I've seen just standing there, and you have to be careful where you point your camera. Lots of people, understandably, extremely upset, having to come to terms with what happened on their streets, in their town, at their firework display, at their celebration last night, when they should have been having a good time on Bastille Day, and instead these terrible events happened here. At the moment, as you say, the death toll stands at 84, but there are some severely injured people, and it wouldn't be a surprise to anyone if that went up, Andrew.
All right, thank you very much for that. Live from Nice there. The city, the region, the country, of course, in a state of shock, and will continue that way through the weekend, and I would suspect well into next week it will be a harrowing time when the funerals begin of those who were killed in that attack last night. We're joined now by Majid Nawaz from the Quilliam Foundation. It's a counter-extremism think tank. Is there any reason we can divine as to why France is bearing the brunt of these attacks?
Yes.
In Europe?
There is. 2 years ago, ISIS spokesperson Adnani, let's be clear, this hasn't been claimed yet by ISIS, but all the signs are there that this is a jihadist attack, clearly. 2 years ago, ISIS spokesperson Adnani instructed their followers to engage in precisely this type of attack, using cars to mow people down on the streets. In that instruction, he specified and highlighted France in particular for such an attack. So we have to think, why do they have a particular grudge against France? Well, one of it is pragmatism. There happen to be a lot of recruits that have come from France, and because France, unlike Britain, is on continental Europe, it's easier to attack in France than it is, say, in Britain, though we are clearly overdue an attack here as well. The other is they bear a grudge against France for things such as the France's stance on the Charlie Hebdo cartoons and free speech, which is a laudable stance, by the way, and the ban on face veils. And jihadists have long taken such a ban personally and declared that they wish to attack France in particular as a symbol of Western enlightenment and freedoms.
Are we right to be puzzled, but also grateful, of course, that we haven't had so far a similar attack in this country in recent years?
Yes, and I think part of the reason is the fact there's the English Channel in the middle, and we have always controlled our own borders, and it makes it harder to get here, but also to acquire guns for those who are here already. Though I must say, Andrew, I think that we are long overdue an attack, and I just want the nation to be prepared for the tragic day that something like that happens here soon. I've been long saying it's overdue, and I'm frankly surprised it hasn't happened yet.
I mean, we take comfort. It is certainly harder to get automatic weapons in this country than it is in France. In France, it may be not as easy as America, but there are a lot of automatic weapons in France, and you can get, if you want them, this guy was a criminal, you can get a hold of them. But actually, this was not a terrorist attack. I mean, it did involve a weapon, but it didn't seem to be the most important thing. I mean, anybody can rent a truck one day and find a way of driving it into a huge crowd the next day.
And Hamas has been doing this in Israel for years. They long ago realized that it was difficult to penetrate Israeli security barriers and checkpoints. So what they decided is to change tactic and to find everyday weapons like cars, to turn them into weapons and to mow people down at bus stops, which is what Hamas has been doing in Israel. Jihadists, global jihadists such as Al-Qaeda, in 2010 instructed their followers to adopt such a strategy. And as I said, 2 years ago, ISIS adopted a similar strategy. So what I wouldn't be surprised to see in the United Kingdom is a city not in the capital, a soft target, such as a celebration on the streets on a festival or a national holiday, and a car or other such similar daily tools being used.
Something unexceptional.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can have a similar effect on the psyche of the nation.
A lot of people in social media were saying to me this morning, oh, but our intelligence services are so wonderful and that's why we've not been attacked. Now, it is true our intelligence services have thwarted a number of attacks in recent years. It's also true that French intelligence thwarted a number of attacks as recently as during the European football competition. But when I speak to the intelligence services, they are the first people to say, we can't stop everything. So I think it is kind of it's wrong and unfair to expect our intelligence services to get everything, isn't it?
Of course, and they're not going to stop everything. What I'd encourage our authorities to do is to start preparing now for the response when an attack happens. Now, that response mustn't only be a legal and a CT response, but also
counter-terrorism.
Counter-terrorism. What we need as well in place is a response within communities. Now, it's clear that, of course, we mustn't let terrorists divide us, but we also, and something we've been weak at, is we also have to acknowledge that, yes, terrorists mustn't divide our communities, but in the long term, we need a strategy to engage in this generational struggle. And that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. Muslims and non-Muslims need to stand together to start challenging some of the ideology that underpins this type of terrorism. It won't be easy at first. It wasn't easy when people started challenging racism and anti-Semitism and homophobia, but eventually those battles were won, and this is a similar generational struggle.
The new Prime Minister and what is in effect a new government, given all the changes, given what's happened in France, given the enduring and ongoing danger still in this country, they're going to have to give more thought to this, are they not? They're going to have to do more than has been done so far and perhaps think of new ways.
Absolutely, and Theresa May's had a sterling record on the counter-terrorism side of things at the Home Office. What she hasn't previously had to deal with is the community cohesion side of things, because she's never had that brief in the Communities and Local Government Department, whereas Prime Minister Cameron, during his tenure, adopted a full-spectrum approach. And I think Theresa's views on this have evolved over the years from being hard-end counter-terrorism to accepting the need for a full-spectrum, whole-of-society approach. But it remains to be seen as to whether, how committed she remains to that, and I certainly hope she is.
Well, I'm sure it's suddenly moved up her agenda. Thank you very much. Now, he ran the Bank of England for 10 years, steering the British economy alongside the occupants of number 11 Downing Street. First Gordon Brown, then Alistair Darling, and finally George Osborne. Now, Mervyn King is keen to encourage state schools to get their school children to play cricket. This is his soapbox.
Like these children, I too learnt to play cricket in a school playground. Mine was in Yorkshire, in the primary school in Old Town on the moors above Hebden Bridge. Today we're in London, but the spirit is the same, playing in a team and competing to win. A pretty good preparation for the world of work.
So good schools know that opportunities like this are a part of a complete education. But over the years it's become more and more difficult for state schools to provide opportunities for children to take part in extracurricular activities, whether it's sport or music or drama or a host of other activities in which children can find themselves.
That's why a decade ago the charity Chance to Shine was started. It set out to regenerate cricket in state schools. Why? Because to learn how to win and how to lose, that teams comprise people with different skills and abilities, and that respect for the opposition is an essential part of competition, really altogether mean the spirit of cricket, and for that matter, life itself. There is more to education than simply the national curriculum, and more than any other sport, cricket crosses social, ethnic and gender divides. Chance to Shine has now reached over 11,000 state schools, and more than 3 million children have been given the chance to learn cricket and play competitive matches. It has helped to build confidence, motivation and the aspirations of children up and down the country.
Was this your dream job?
My dream job would be, I think, to be captain of Worcestershire in England, but sadly I never made it. I had to be governor of the Bank of England instead. I think I'd rather have captained Worcestershire. Well, cricket certainly seems to have ensured a healthy appetite for these children for their lunch today, but more significantly what we hope is that cricket will enthuse their appetites for many other interests and subjects, and to raise their aspirations by giving them a sense of self-esteem. Chance to Shine is not aiming to produce the next England star,
but to use cricket to broaden educational experience. So ask not what these children can do for cricket, but what cricket can do for our children.
And Mervyn King joins us now. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Andy.
There's a systemic problem with cricket for schools, though, isn't there? And it's the time it takes. If you are teachers giving up a Saturday or an evening, you do rugby, football, hockey, wherever, it doesn't take so long, but cricket can last all day. It's demanding.
Well, it doesn't have to be now. I mean, the T20 and the professional game, and of course in schools, actually playing the game, you can play it for any length of time you like. So we provide all the resources to schools, and the aim of this is to add a new dimension to the life of a school, which is why head teachers love it.
They do. I mean, you think
absolutely.
Are you going to win this battle? Are you going to reverse? I mean, I was looking at the ECB, and by that I don't mean the European Central Bank, something much more important.
Much more important.
The English Cricket Board, they carried out a major survey, 60,000 fewer playing the sport at the grassroots level than the previous year. Can you reverse that?
Well, we can, but the main thing is to get it going in schools. That's what we want to do, because of the educational benefit of playing a team sport. And you could see in some of the film, but we've seen it in many schools around the country, that you find children from different ethnic and gender backgrounds all playing together, and they don't notice the differences. They're all part of the same team, and I think that's a wonderful preparation for the world of work.
Cricket is an interesting sport because you can be both highly individual, but you are part of a team. At tennis, you're an individual.
Yep.
Football is a kind of team, though obviously there are famous individuals in that. But cricket combines the individuality and a collective objective.
Exactly, and that is why it is the perfect preparation for the world of work later on, where individual performance matters, but so does the team.
Did cricket help you when you were Governor of the Bank of England?
Well, it certainly helped me when I was at school. I don't think I would have taken my academic work as seriously as I did had I not had the chance both to play cricket, but do other things like drama, chess, all of these things which a good school provides and which many state schools have not been able to provide. And what we do is to make sure that we can take cricket to a school. It doesn't cost them anything, either in time or money, and we add to the dimension of the
And you
school.
can provide because cricket does, unlike again, I mean, when I was a kid with football, you just had to put 2 jackets down and for the goals, and you had a ball.
We can provide everything. We do. And the coaches, that's the main thing.
Do we have the grounds?
No, but many schools or clubs make available their grounds, and at primary school level, there are markings in playgrounds. You can use it there. That film was filmed in Waterloo in central London, in a playground within the school.
Of course, lots of second, third generation kids, immigrant families now, they come from cricketing countries, don't they?
Absolutely.
That must be a plus.
It's a big plus, and that integration is a key part of the programme. And you see it right around the country where people forget whatever ethnic backgrounds they had, and they're all playing on the same team.
And it's part of the danger has been with the decline is it's become a state school, private school of business, hasn't it? The cricket has become more dominated by the private schools as some of the state schools have moved away. That's what you're also out to reverse, I think.
Absolutely. Only 7% of children go to private schools, but they account for far more of the professional game. What we want to do, rather like Theresa May with her cabinet, and we also tragic events in Nice, what this brings home is the importance to put, to really make a success of our state schools, and to do it in a way which breaks down the ethnic divides.
Now, since I've got you were governor when we cut rates to 0.5%.
Yes.
7 years ago, I think.
Yes.
Now, I bet you when you did that, you never thought that 7 years later it would still be 0.5%.
Absolutely right. And indeed, every minister and central bank governor in the G7 who met in Washington in 2008 after the collapse of Lehman Brothers at the height of the crisis, no one imagined that 8 years on we'd be where we are today.
And this, explain something, how could this happen? On Wednesday, I think, afternoon, Reuters gives us a poll of economists, largely based in the city, but beyond that, in which 80% of them are pretty sure the governor is going to cut rates on Thursday morning. And of course, the governor doesn't cut rates. I mean, do they say that just on a wing and a prayer, or does the bank give out signals that that's maybe what it's going to do?
But we never gave out signals, and I think the lesson in this is don't bother to look at opinion polls of economists.
Or economists.
Just, there's no need to. All you need to do now is a very good system. We have a monetary policy committee of 9 members. Just wait once a month. They will reveal their decision.
And it voted 8-1 not to do it, so the economists couldn't be more off. Because they may do it in August, so there's been indication that
they may
do it. Is it fair to say, putting all the sort of project fear away, is that given that the economy was already slowing down earlier this year and seems to have done more so since April onwards, that in this quarter and the next quarter we are likely to go through maybe not a recession but certainly a slowdown?
I think we certainly should expect some sort of slowdown. Clearly there's uncertainty now with the new situation leaving the European Union. That will mean that some investment projects will be put on hold. But we simply don't know how serious that will be, and we don't have any data yet to suggest that. So there's been a slight degree of hysteria in the reaction in the last 3 weeks, obviously primarily among the political class, which has been tearing itself.
And some of the media too.
And some of the media, absolutely. Media and the political class tearing themselves to pieces, wildly exaggerating things. And I hope now we'll be able to calm down and get back to a proper programme of work to make this departure from the European Union a workable success, which we can certainly do.
If they all went and either watched or played a good game of cricket, I'm sure they would have a better judgment.
They certainly would.
Reverend King, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
On Monday morning, David Cameron was still the Prime Minister. The nation was looking forward to a long summer contest. Well, I say looking forward, I exaggerate. Between Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom over who would go into number 10. At the end of another tumultuous week in British politics, we thought we'd look back, exhausted, at the events of the last 5 days.
I have concluded that the interests of our country are best served by the immediate appointment of a strong and well-supported Prime Minister.
I am honoured and humbled.
Questions to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Other than one meeting this afternoon with Her Majesty the Queen, the diary for the rest of my day is remarkably light.
Just been to Buckingham Palace, where Her Majesty the Queen has asked me to form a new government, and I accepted.
Inevitable that there's going to be a certain amount of plaster coming off the ceiling in the chancelleries of Europe. It wasn't the result that they were expecting.
There we go, another historic week in British politics. We've got about a minute left, 30 seconds to each of you for your thought on where we go from here.
Well, where we go from here is that Theresa May, after all those flowers have been delivered and everyone sent their congratulations, she really has to settle down. There has to be a really strong centre to this government. She's got quite a vociferous team, we reflected earlier, but at the same time, she's got a big job. There's one job by which she will be judged. How does Brexit go? Brexit was exit for David Cameron, but for her, it was her big chance. She's got the team, she's got the reorganisation. Now she has the big task. That'll be her legacy.
I just don't know how we get to a year from here. I can't see quite what we're going to do on Brexit. I think that I can't see how you square demands to stay close to the single market with what the public think they voted for in the referendum on immigration. And I think that will be the defining question of her government. And if she solves that, then everything else will unfold well for her after that. But it's going to be very hard.
Perfect timing. We must have the two of you back. Thank you very much for that. That's it for today. Thanks to all of my guests. The 1 o'clock news is starting over now on BBC One, and I'll be back on BBC One on Sunday with the Sunday Politics. That's 11 o'clock this Sunday morning. I hope you can join me then. Something will have happened. Bye-bye.